Yeah, he depending on his life, he would love to run for something. I can't remember the name of it.
The church?
Yeah, he ran for Fort Collins council position or something.
Yeah, one of those races.
Tom Jones coming in?
Yeah, he just sent me a text, it was like 15 minutes later. And then you know that Ken and
And then there were
'Cause I think we want to get a lot of information.
Actually, Ken is checking around someone that needs the last photo ever taken.
Are we okay to start? Okay, folks, I think we're gonna get started because there is a lot of information that we have to go through this evening, and we have to be up in the chambers at 7 p.m. for our board meeting. So we're gonna start tonight's town board work session for July 22nd. We've got two main items on, but the first one is the preliminary transportation master plan information. And who's gonna lead? Are you gonna start with that discussion, Scott?
Yeah, just a quick
Okay.
introduction. We had put this in this meeting in the scope for the transportation master plan project because staff knows that the board really wants to try and identify some projects that might be quick wins or things that we can implement in the 2020 CIP budget. And knowing we've already got other CIP priorities that engineering and planning have been working on diligently, these are some of the early projects out of the TDP project that we wanted to kind of walk you through the input that we've received thus far, and then run through some of those projects. And then after that, we'll also talk to the guys from Greeley Evans Transit regarding the bus route, or the Blue Express route. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carly.
Well, and before that, Scott, Mayor, I don't know if you'd like to just go around the table and kind of introduce everybody since we've
Sure.
got a lot of folks here.
Sure. So I'll start. I'm Christy Melendez. I'm the mayor of Windsor.
Jerry Bushelman, Planning Commission.
Ian McCarter, town attorney.
Shane Hale, town manager.
Paul Renmeyer, town board.
Barry Wilson, town board. David Soslowski, town board.
Okay.
Wade Willis, Open Space and Trails Manager.
Cindy Sharman, Planning Commission.
Kimmy Willis, Assistant Town Attorney.
Carl Lua, Chief Planner.
Carly Seif from Fair and Pierce.
Scott Paulson, Director of Planning.
Carlos Hernandez, our firm is Fox Tuttle Hernandez Transportation Group, working on the Transportation Master Plan.
I'm Melissa Balding, I'm also with Fair and Pierce, also working on the Transportation Master Plan.
Will Jones, City Greeley Public Works.
Darren Davis, Steve Greeley, Transit Manager.
Dennis Wagner, Windsor Engineering.
Okay.
A note, we have two attorneys, so be careful.
Three?
Yeah.
Come sit by you, Dave.
Spread them apart.
I can litigate too.
Pass plaintiff.
Thank you all for being here this evening. We have a lot to cover, as was mentioned. So starting with a review of the public outreach that we've been doing over the last 6 weeks and the result of what we've heard from the community, from staff, from stakeholders. And then based on this community outreach and our interaction with the public, business owners, visitors, we've drafted up a vision statement that we wanted to present to you, which will be kind of our guiding statement, potentially for the next decade until the TMP is updated again. So very important. The goals, which will help guide and direct the vision, and then the results from this process of public outreach, as well as the vision and goals that have informed the quick win projects for the 2020 CIP. So probably about 20 to 30 minutes of presentation, and then want to dedicate the remaining time to questions and a focus on the CIP Quick Win project. So we'll go through all of the slides first and then can take questions and a conversation after that. So this was a little bit of a unique approach, and the results provided projects that are a little bit different for Windsor. So excited to present the projects that reflect the vision for the community and the vision for staff as well. So a timeline, just a reminder of where we've been and where we're going. We last came to you, I think it was May 6th, where we presented some existing conditions, what we had gathered from a review of previous planning efforts and an analysis of a snapshot of where the town of Windsor is today. And since then, we've been busy on the ground, interacting with the public and doing some high-level preliminary analysis and qualitative assessment. And so here we are today, presenting to you all the results of kind of the first set of recommendations, and then we'll go back to the drawing board and come up with short, medium, and long-term recommendations based on a more quantitative analysis, and then come back to you all and discuss prioritization and cost of that longer list of projects, with wrapping up end of March with hopefully adoption of the TMP. So a lot of work still left to do, but some exciting findings from where we've been over the last 5 months.
Sorry, as I looked at this, are we at the light bar that says town board presentation
Yes.
in July?
We are.
So the traditional open house that is right next to it has already been held?
So, yep, a little bit of this has shifted over time. So the open house was earlier, so we could have some time to synthesize what we heard from the open house
Okay.
before coming to you. So yeah, this was the schedule from the initial scope, but
Okay.
kind of thinking through things, slight modifications. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate that. And so as the bar shows, public outreach will be throughout the process, but in 2 major phases, what we just had in June, and then again in the fall to pass our draft recommendations to the community as well and be able to take their kind of honing of those ideas as well as their prioritization.
Thank you.
So jumping into the public outreach process and results first. So this was just since we had a quick timeline in just 6 weeks and almost 1,000 people. So I just want to take a moment to pat staff on the back for a lot of hard work, evenings and a lot of kind of boots on the ground, touch points with a ton of members of the public, from children to lunch with seniors, to everything in between. So we do a lot of work. We just wrapped up the TMP in Fort Collins, doing the TMP in Loveland now, and I can tell you 1,000 people is extremely impressive for the size of Windsor. So just want to start with that. And so this came from a broad number of different approaches to interacting with the public. So we know not everyone can make the Tuesday evening open house. We did get 50 people, a really great representation there, but the intercept events were especially important to get in front of folks who can't come to the traditional open house. So we came to walk and bike to school a day, things to wait for a lot of help there. The summer concert series, senior lunch, bike night, and also had an online survey for those who are busy to come in person. Got over 200 responses to our Survey Monkey, and social media as well.
I have a clarification or
Yeah.
a question.
Yeah.
So on the 400 walk and bike to school day, because I participated in that, and that was at least, our participants were all elementary school children. So of those, is all 400 kids, basically, the respondents?
Yes, and Wade and Scott staffed that, so.
So I think an important thing, while this is an impressive number to measure, almost 50% came from children who were from 3rd to, I don't know what grade level you were at. And in my experience, many of those kids didn't even know what address they lived at and stuff. So I mean, it's just something, it doesn't disqualify, but I think it's important to note that a big percentage of that information came from children's perspectives.
Definitely, and we catered the exercises at each event to the audience, so yeah, it's a little bit more facilitation on putting sticker dots on the map.
Yeah.
So here's another one of the outputs from the synthesized information from the public. So these are called word clouds, if you've seen them before, and it's a great way to show a lot of different feedback that we heard. So we had folks write 3 words that described how do they currently experience Windsor, and then based on the number of occurrences for each word, you can see the size of the word will change. So congested, unsafe, crowded, those were some of the most commonly occurring words that we saw. Slow, traffic, frustrating. This was from over 1,000 different words. And then on the right side, it's kind of the flip side we have people imagine what Windsor looks like in 20 years from now. Come back to 2019 and describe that in 3 more words. And so we see kind of words that are on the flip side of what on the left side, so safe, flowing, efficient, connected. And this was really important to forming the vision statement and to make sure that the projects that we're recommending encompass these words and this idea of what is ideal for traveling in Windsor. Some other questions we asked on the left side, we said, what are your top 3 locations that you want to walk or bike to? And this would help inform, where do we want to prioritize bicycle and pedestrian connections? What type of walking and biking is most important for people? And so recreating or traveling to recreation, so to parks and open space, to the rec center, to trails, to the historic downtown were very important. Also, walking and biking for transportation, so to the grocery store was also important. And then we had a lot of free-form comments, so not multiple choice, not directed exercises, but just open-ended comments. Hundreds as you saw in your town board packet. I'm sure all of those scanned in, and so we synthesized those by coming up with common themes, and a lot of these we didn't capture in other ways, so really important to make sure that we're considering truck traffic, and that's in the context of making sure that bicycle and pedestrian priority corridors are not coinciding with where we see heavy truck traffic. Congestion came up again, crossing, so not just walking and biking along corridors, but across corridors as well. Access to trails, high speeds. So all things that you'll see when we get to the CIP recommended projects, that these themes are addressed. So, sorry, the circle, your computer's missing the circle font. So we also asked people to put stickers on the map as to where they experience certain kinds of challenges. So many of you have probably seen that big 10-foot by 10-foot vinyl floor map. So people were walking all over it and putting sticker dots. So we asked them 5 different questions to get some more spatial data. We asked them, where do you not feel safe walking? And we see a focus on arterials, some high speed, high volume intersections really popping up. Then asked people where they don't feel safe biking. Some new corridors that appear here on 7th, consistent on 257, a lot of dots on 392. We asked them where trails are difficult to access, so clusters around trailheads and certain trailheads rising to the top here. Where maintenance is needed, and this is for all modes, again we see as one would expect on some of the more major arterials. And then lastly, where is driving challenging? 392 comes up, Crossroads appears a little bit as well, and so this was interesting to overlay with crash data. So not only are we seeing where people don't feel safe, but we're backing that up with the real data, so both perceived and real safety issues. So kind of the analysis is beginning to come together and to tell a story, and that story is important to translate into recommendations. So vision, goals, and performance measures were the exercise that we did coming out of public outreach. So we looked at that word cloud. We had a really fun exercise with staff and came up with the vision statement of Windsor's transportation system will serve people of all ages and abilities through a connected, multimodal network that is safe, equitable, comfortable, sustainable, and intuitive. So this vision describes, as I was saying before, the word clouds. In 2040, this is how one would ideally describe traveling in Windsor. So the statement I know is kind of, it's intangible and it's hard to come to, but it really holds a lot of weight as it will be the driving statement and that driving force as we decide what projects are most important, what do we want to fund first. We'll continually look back on this vision statement and make sure that the direction we're moving in is in line with the vision that we've set. That's been a reflection of the community, the staff, and you all here today. So the goals are the following slides, and they're how do we get to this vision statement? That's an ambitious statement, that would be great, but let's break it down a little bit and provide some direction. So the first goal category is safety, and a safe multimodal transportation system that reduces stress, injury, and conflict is the goal of safety of the transportation network. And so one more layer below this are performance measures. How do we track and measure success? So how do we know in 10 years if we're on our way to what we've described here? And it's a lot of information for an hour, so we put in your packet the performance measures that go along with each of these goals. The second goal is efficiency, a multimodal network that efficiently moves people and goods. Public health, build a multimodal transportation system that improves public health and quality of life for everyone. Transportation options, a multimodal network of connected, complete streets and routes that expands transportation options. Regional collaboration, a regionally connected multimodal network developed through collaboration with regional partners. The folks in this room help exemplify that. Maintenance, provide continued maintenance of transportation infrastructure to minimize capital costs. Last one, fiscal responsibility, ensure transportation investments are cost effective and fiscally responsible for all modes of travel. So that's a lot of information, and a lot of these are a little bit more conceptual and more challenging to think about, so welcome your input on those as well. So moving from there, we have tied all of this together to inform the CIP Quick Win projects, and we have 6 of those. And so we'll go through each one and high-level description of what that looks like, and then some costs. And here's a recap of how we came up with those Quick Win projects. So a lot of public outreach. This is an image from the summer concert series showing the breadth of input of who we heard from. And then staff input as well. So we had a charrette just right upstairs. And put more stickers and Post-its on the map to, based on what we heard from the public, start to hone in on a smaller list and get insight from a lot of the institutional knowledge here and the ideas of staff and what's a priority. And we follow that with a qualitative assessment. So this is meant to just be a snapshot, not actual any data points you need to absorb, but in that first column we have all of the goals that we just named. In the second column are the performance measures, and then each column after that are one of the projects that was brought up by town staff based on public input. And so qualitative assessment, does this project satisfy that performance measure? And that was kind of started the conversation about what are the list of projects. I think we had about 30 that we brought down to 6. So we considered geographic diversity, not having all of our project recommendations for next year's CIP be focused in one small area of downtown. Modal diversity to make sure we're addressing biking, walking, and vehicular efficiency and safety and access. And then as well as a reflection of a lot of the qualitative data that we presented in the first piece. So
what are those numbers across the top, what represent?
That was
in orange.
Yeah, so we have staff support and public support, so we made a heat map of all of those maps and the concentration of data we broke into natural breaking points, and so it was a qualitative effort, but we wanted to capture.
So 1 means what though?
That's 4. A lower number, and then 4 is more.
1 it would not be a priority, 4 would be a higher priority?
1 means that there wasn't a lot of staff support, and then as the numbers increase. So
the bigger the number,
the more support, yeah. And so this was meant to be a qualitative exercise, but in order to come up with that qualitative low, medium, high, we first assigned numbers that helped inform that. Since there was so much information here, we needed to kind of start to break it down. And just a reminder that we're early in the process. We haven't yet done our quantitative analysis, but we wanted to make sure that we were getting some paint on the ground, some things in action next year. So we're early in the process. There's more vetting that needs to be done, but wanted to expedite and be able to identify some quick wins first. But there's more work that needs to be done and more analysis. So the first project is a corridor improvement of 7th Street. So the first phase of this would be $150,000 for a study and for 100% design. So being unsure of what the study will exactly reveal, we have identified a list of potential project ideas that would need to be studied further, of course. So pedestrian improvements, this could include bulb outs, landscaping, a bike facility, high level look, this could be a bike lane, but would need to be cross section and kind of curb-to-curb width and potential conflicts would need to be looked at further. And important is access to the Poudre River Trail, and that came from public output pretty explicitly. Folks want access to the trail, and then the roundabout at Eastman Park, challenging for cyclists, so looking at potential ways to make that feel safer. So a very conservative estimate of cost for constructing the outcome of the study would be about $1 million with contingency. The second project is multimodal safety improvements at the intersection of State Highway 392 and 7th Street. There's work being done now through Fox Tuttle Hernandez on this intersection for vehicular improvements. So we're suggesting kind of it's a different funding pot following that. There would be multimodal improvements to look at pedestrian and bicycle safety. The middle school is just about a block and a half away from here on 8th and 392, so providing safe access for school children and looking at national standards, best practices, and guidelines to see what exact facilities would need to be recommended here, but this intersection rose to the top for multimodal safety. The cost here, $50,000 for planning and design, and then about a $275,000 cost for implementation of that. Walnut Street Bikeway is a study at first to get to 100% design of corridor improvements would be about $75,000, but looking at a connection all the way from 15th Street to State Highway 257. So from State Highway 257 to 10th is direct on Walnut Street, and then potential for a neighborhood greenway or bike boulevards also called to continue on to 15th Street. And so this came out of an alternative bicycle route for folks looking to travel parallel to 392, obviously not feeling comfortable on 392, and with your street grid, Walnut Street provides the best alternative to do so. So looking at what a bike facility looks like, signing, striping, and having that be intuitive and safe for users. Left turn treatment at County Road 13 and State Highway 392. So northbound and southbound traffic currently, there are challenges in finding a gap in traffic for left turning vehicles. So looking at adding a dedicated left turn and the appropriate signal phasing that would go along with that. Study and design for $25,000, and then a $275,000 estimated implementation cost, and that would assume that no additional right-of-way would need to be acquired for this, and so that would would be determined based on the results of the study. County Road 17 and River Place Drive, a rapid rectangular flashing beacon, which is a device to help pedestrians cross a street. So across County Road 17, it's pedestrian actuated, which means once a pedestrian arrives, they push the button and it results in flashing yellow lights, telling the vehicle that they need to yield to the pedestrian, and then once the pedestrian has crossed the street, the vehicle is able to proceed. And so high level, based on the volume and speed along County Road 17, a rapid rectangular flashing beacon is an appropriate device. This would need to be confirmed and studied further. And costs, so study costs are $25,000 with construction at $100,000, and that's an estimate depending on utilities, and a survey would need to be done to determine that. And then lastly, the sixth project is filling in a gap in the pedestrian network. So this is between the number 2 ditch trail on the north side, you can see, and the King Supers over there on the south on County Road 15. So there's a key gap that's between a really nice trail and a key destination. And because both bicyclists and pedestrians are using the ditch trail and looking to travel south, providing a 10-foot multi-use path would allow safe use for both modes. And so this is a cost of $65,000. I think we got through that in good time, leaving lots of room for questions. I know that was a lot.
What's your plan for doing the Walnut Street Bikeway out to 15th Street?
So that would be determined in a study, but there's opportunity to weave it. I'm forgetting the name of the street now, the Eastwood Street just north. But so basically a neighborhood greenway doesn't necessarily have a dedicated space for bicyclists, and it's appropriate on low volume, low speed streets, and it makes really intuitive signing and striping opportunities for cyclists. So sometimes there's called greenback sharrows along the street and branded signage to help people kind of make that wiggle in a way where you don't even need to think about it. You definitely don't need to look at a map, and you can travel very easily and clearly between east and west. But that would be something that would need to be looked at in further study. But kind of at a high level, that's why we drew this arrow to the west, but that would be revealed as part of the study. But that's kind of the high level thought. Yeah, Travis?
So the other part of this is it's more than bikes. So it can be neighborhood traffic calming, it can be neighborhood safety, speed safety devices. So it's not just, we call it a bikeway, but it can be more than just that within the budget that's been noted there. Particularly when you ride at intersections, how we resolve some of the stop signs and how they are oriented is part of that study. The only other thing I'd add, just as a soundbite, just so that, you see all these numbers adding up here, right? And the cost of these projects, when I did the math last time, was about 2.6, maybe you could get them up to 3, and that was $3 million total for these 6 projects. Just as a reference point of last year's CIP, you had about $9 million in transportation projects last year in your CIP. That excludes maintenance. You had about $4.5 million in maintenance. So when we're coming here saying these 6 quick win projects are roughly around $3 million, that's about 33.33% of what you spent last year, just as a reference point.
Thanks.
I have a couple of things, but first, there are a couple of chairs if you guys want to come in up here and not.
No, please, we'd like to get you on camera.
But these are all cost estimates, right? So what's the margin of error here? 10%?
I have a cost 12% contingency already in all of these projects.
So one thing I didn't see in the proposal that would be, I think, be helpful is we need one chart that has all these projects side by side with the dollar amounts, so that we can do, if we chose to want to see a side-by-side cost comparison to some things.
Yeah, we have that in.
Do you have that?
Send that.
I did.
Your way.
Yes.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good point.
I've got a question for staff. If we're moving forward with the roundabout at 13 and New Liberty, that's going to eliminate a flashing beacon that's at that intersection right now. Considering all of these options, couldn't that be taken to River Place and 7th and installed fast and at a lower cost, because we've already got a lot of the equipment?
Yes, I think so. Yep, absolutely.
I see shaking heads. That's good. I'm so glad I came.
Yeah, a lot of the costs Carlos was explaining to me before the meeting, because our RFPs, we normally budget about $25,000 for those. And so 125 is obviously significantly more, but that's because we don't think we have adequate utilities there. So there's gonna be a lot more groundwork, but certainly, yeah, for the equipment. But a great thing about an RFP is you really can take a lot of that equipment, pick it up and move it somewhere else. So if we go to a hawk signal or a traffic signal later, all that equipment is recyclable and movable. So that's a great idea, Paul. And if the board put it in the budget, we could absolutely do that with it.
And we can update costs accordingly based on that information.
I just think it's a fast solution to.
Yes, that's great.
Right, and I also wanted to just let the board know, like Scott said, what I didn't want to do, what staff didn't want to do is adopt the 2020 budget, have this plan complete in March, have the board say, hey, these are great projects, and then wait a year to start getting going. I know everybody is ready now to do these projects, so we want to get these in front of you. Anything that the board wants more detail on or likes the concept, you'll consider again during the CIP process in August. So this is just, is this even worth us vetting this out more for August? Or if you don't like the project or we need to see something else, we can do that. So that's kind of the timing. It's a little bit awkward because it's not really fully baked, but I felt like it was better to do this than to hit March and say, well, sorry, we'll wait until.
So what's the timeline and process if we were to maybe like all this? Each individual project that has to go out to an RFP or not, or do we put it all together in a pot for an RFP?
We would probably break them out, and so if the board, like these, we put them in the CIP, the board adopted that CIP with all these included. Maybe staff, December, January, get out RFP, start working on the design work. I think some of these things possibly we could design in-house. I don't know, that would really be due to engineering capacity, but what we couldn't, we'd start designing, through consultants. engage
Okay,
on.
and then I know Ken had sent an email with several questions. Were his questions answered? Do we need to bring up his letter and maybe look and ask those questions? Well, we've got folks in the room that can answer those, or?
And I think Carly's got some of those answers, and some of those
Okay.
will probably be answered more fully during the CIP discussion in a few weeks.
Okay,
But
Yeah, I tried to kind of weave them throughout, but just to make sure we hit on all of them. Ken wanted to know how the quick win projects were determined. And so as we talked about, combination of qualitative and quantitative exercise, and that we considered staff support, public support, and the vision and goals fit into that as well. For the 392 and 7th multimodal intersection, he wanted to know, does the cost estimate include the present widening project or is totally separate? How do these two plans fit together? So separate funding and considering the recommendations of what's happening now at that intersection, and then making sure we're tying in the multimodal piece, which is really what this quick win project emphasizes to that. What are the next steps in vetting these recommendations? So there'll be a separate CIP work session later this month or later in August. And so this is kind of early level with opportunities for vetting this further in the coming weeks. Wanted to know if all 6 quick win projects were done, it's approximately $22.5 million, would this come from the roadway improvement fund? So it sounds like there's some funding in roadway impact fees, but other funding pots as well.
yeah, we'd have to look at that as well, just based on town board direction as to what projects you wanted us to vet further. Because as I said, there are other CIP projects that are further along and already being planned that you'll be seeing at the next work session. So we'd have to definitely do the calculations with the road impact fee.
Yeah, so it'd be a combo, road impact and CIP.
Can I add just one thing to that?
Yeah.
So can you just go back to the beginning? I just want to streamline this so you can see this for a sec. So, go back to the first project slide.
Oops.
Sorry. So, other communities are packaging the process and the work for this together to streamline the costs. And so Fort Collins would be a better example of this. They have a bond project that was passed by the voters, and they're having one workshop where the community can come and weigh in on all the bond projects. And at that workshop, all the boards are out of the progress of these projects. This one would be an example. This needs some thought and vetting. I put this one on you probably want to get some help for this one, but you wouldn't need 4 workshops for this one. Next project. This one is a simpler effort. I think that this one's just one intersection. There's affected stakeholder outreach around the intersection we're really gonna wanna speak with, but this one's not as complicated as the other one. Next one.
so are you still recommending additional stakeholder input now on each of these individual, even though we gathered that all to get to this point in place?
Great.
Now we are gonna have to have additional stakeholder?
We're not
But is that, I'm assuming that's optional, or?
we're not gonna
not?
have it, it's required. We have, in order to make these projects successful and to have buy-in, when they are at the front doors of people's houses or businesses, it's critical to have stakeholder engagement. And so if you had an individual process for each of these projects, you would have probably 2 years worth of process. And what the CIP that I'm suggesting, this process that we're talking about others are doing, is you have one workshop that shows all 7 processes. The mailings go out to all so this one is example, everybody who has a front door on Walnut Street would get a mailer that says, this is the open house for the CIP, we'd really like you to attend. We also get the community talking about these projects at one workshop, so that you don't end up with extra money, extra time with 7 different meetings.
Okay, that's,
So this one is one particularly though, for that there are a lot of front doors here, and people wanna be engaged in the front doors. So this one's gonna take a little more time. This one seems like, there's some concern here, but there's no front doors here, so this one could be a streamline. Next one. This one seems pretty streamlined. You've been doing these all over, so this shouldn't be very difficult. And then the last one, this is a sidewalk connection, so there's only 2 in there that I really think will require a little more of that process.
11 and 7.
Yes.
And would you suggest, really having those as part of the same workshop or breaking those off?
Well, the value of having everybody together in the room is you get a lot of turnout, you get neighbors talking to neighbors, you show as a board that you're making progress towards the TMP. When you segment the meetings, you get basically neighborhood meetings, neighborhood concerns, and so it's better to have them all together.
Okay.
One more question that Ken talked about, unless it's on the same page.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, and would that be part of the recommendation outreach that we're doing in the second phase of the TMP? Is it concurrently or as part of that?
Yeah, you wanna put a bow on the TMP and have that done, and then you're gonna have to start some design. When you have folks who are very busy engaged in this process, you wanna show them the designs, so that when they spend an hour and a half or 2 hours of their evening, you say, here's the design we're working on, here's your house, here's your business, here's what we're doing. We wouldn't have that during the TMP.
Right.
So I would, if the timing and sequencing worked right, by this time next year, you want to have school be in session, summer vacation be over, maybe you have your workshop in the fall, where you say, here are the 80% plans that we're gonna start constructing this fall.
And then speaking of timeline, Ken asked what the timeline for the TMP it is, which is by end of March wrapping up, and then the timeline for the CDOT 392 and 257 reroute feasibility study, which there's a TAC meeting in August that will present next steps.
And so the board knows, I think we're August 22nd, 26th?
It's in the August 20-something.
Yeah, so I think that fourth work session of the month, we're gonna have CDOT and their consultants present to the board on their findings on that study.
On the 257, 392?
Yes, ma'am.
And you think they're gonna have, they will be ready, then you've heard that they are ready?
Yeah, we met with them, staff met with them last week.
Great.
And heard kind of their findings and what the traffic data is telling them. We're like, we need to get you on the agenda, we need to talk to the board.
You go back a couple of slides, there's the process summary. And that's the table on the right that the mayor was asking about. We see, I believe, just a sample of 3
Yeah.
projects that were evaluated. And then, of course, you had staff support, public support. How many projects are listed on that whole spreadsheet?
Melissa, do you remember? I think it was around 30?
Yeah, in the quick win category, it was 30, and then that list continues on for
So the
other
ones that are
discussions.
recommended are on that spreadsheet somewhere.
Yes.
I'm curious what the staff support numbers and the public support numbers are for the ones you've recommended. And actually seeing this spreadsheet for the ones you recommend, just.
You wanna see it
reduce-
in its entirety?
Well, only for the
spreadsheet
ones they're
perhaps?
recommending, right?
Just-
It's not all 30, unless we want to second guess their recommendation, but
We're looking. We're looking.
Oh,
We'll get back to you in a minute or two. We're gonna look.
Because I realize there's a bridge between the data you collected, if you go back to the map with all the little buttons all over of unsafe here, unsafe there, they did aggregate. There were certain sections of town that highlighted as unsafe or concerning. And I'm curious how these line up to those sections, right? Are we trying to be responsive to it?
Carly, can you go back to the heat map where all the dots are, so that we they overlap, the public input that we received overlaps very well with this map. So,
Yeah.
if you think about where those projects that we just talked about, right?
Yeah,
Like
7th, 257, 13.
Walnut, right, and so where we're seeing crashes, which Carly meant, right, Carly, like, what we're actually seeing the crashes occur, and where the community is telling us we'd like to see projects, are on these arterial streets.
Yeah.
Hence why we're bringing this project forward. We're not gonna go as bold as saying we're gonna do things on 392 and create a bikeway. What we're saying is these parallel streets, Walnut as an example where we do that. So to your question, and hopefully an answer, yes, the community data lines up very well with that. We'll look with the staff ranking in a minute here, because I haven't committed that to memory yet.
For the-
So you actually obtained our recent crash data and all that was
Oh, yeah.
put into this
Yes.
process as well?
For good or bad, it overlays, right, pretty
Okay.
consistently with this,
Sure,
and
makes
at the
sense.
intersections particularly. That's why you see some intersection projects in there. Dennis, is that consistent with what you've seen historically as well?
Yes.
And I guess sorry, Rick.
No, you go ahead.
Finish. My own sense, and certainly on 7th, because I'm always driving that area, but I think crosswalks are a major issue everywhere, especially around schools, right? Wherever the schools are, you've got, 7th is crazy. And you're highlighting just the one where you're thinking about putting out a rapid light signal. I think there's plenty of crosswalks around town that may not be capital intensive, but could sure use a higher level of visibility and a more striking, something that would highlight. Because you don't have to drive here for long before you see someone on a corner waiting to cross and traffic's just not
Well, I think that's where this Seventh Street study
Yes.
would capture a lot of those.
Yeah.
You know, we all seen people have near misses at Hemlock and Garden, and I know Dr. Jones had recently pointed out the cars parked at the apartment complexes and the
Block visibility.
biking by those. So, yeah, I think up and down that corridor, that's why this one's a little more of an extensive project, because it involves that entire stretch.
I'm just wondering if there's other crosswalks that would be a solid return for an investment.
For the RRFB,
I'm sorry?
for the RRFB, the flashing, so we,
I guess I don't know what other technologies are available to make them a little more visible and safer,
right.
but it seems to me there's a lot of those, and it may be a quick hit and relatively inexpensive.
So the board did, last year we budgeted $100,000 for pedestrian improvements.
Yeah.
And those really have been going into those, so like I know we did it on 15th and Grand, was the first one that came from a coffee with the mayor, or Mom and Ass, and it met our warrants. I'm trying to remember the other ones, I know we've done at least one other.
Did one on Locust,
Yeah,
didn't you?
Locust.
Yeah,
Locust
and that was, yeah. and
Based on
so-
neighbors, again, coming.
Right.
Right,
And I want to remind the board that we about a year and a half ago adopted a crosswalk guidelines with the help of FTH. And so we have a very good set of guidelines to follow on crosswalks. And so I know we get calls a lot. We think there should be a crosswalk here, there, but when you look at the guidelines and apply them, it doesn't qualify for crosswalk treatment. So we always go back to those guidelines.
Dennis, where are we at on the 7th and Stone Mountain or 7th and Garden? Because I know those were both.
And Hemlock, I mean, you just hit it
Yeah.
right, you go.
Because those were big, where people churn out off of Stone Mountain on the 7th and then immediately want to whip in to make a left on.
First, we have a crosswalk at 7th and Garden. 7th and Hemlock, we've evaluated that one. If we could turn the clock back before that crosswalk was put there, the signs were there, it wouldn't qualify. So it does not meet standard.
I think all of that will be part of that study then.
Right.
Paul's question, my question. That's a, 7th is definitely.
At least it's a wide road and we have a lot of room to work with.
Again, go back to that heat map, because I think one that surprised me, I sort of circled where I thought there were some concentrations. The one that surprised me was this yellow and green right in here, which I think must be the school. Is that where the elementary school is, the STEM school? Why? Because it seems like a middle of nowhere, and yet there's a concentration of maintenance needed and don't
That's
feel
Walnut,
safe.
isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Isn't that
No.
West Walnut?
That's where Skyview is.
Yes.
Oh,
It's kind of- That's because I was saying, I mean, all the, especially around the schools, and you saw the comments in here, the people noted in the Charter Academy, has no buses, there are tons of traffic during school session.
but then again, remember, if we had 400 kids, that's why you're seeing that too.
Yeah.
Because the kids would comment about getting there. and-
Yeah.
David, I think that stretch, from zooming in on it, it looks like it's basically Walnut between 11th and 15th roughly,
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in
That
the,
would make sense.
And
It
that was one of my
Yeah.
questions in relation to the Walnut Bikeway, because while I think most of Walnut probably has room for things like that, while still accommodate parking, that stretch from 12th to 15th is so narrow that even if there's cars parked on both sides and two cars navigating that, it's cozy to say
Yeah,
the least.
and that's why it recommending a neighborhood greenway, kind of west of 11th of 10th, is more appropriate than probably a designated bike facility like a bike lane.
So
Because
the,
I'm not seeing where there's land for a neighborhood greenway.
so when we say neighborhood bikeway or neighborhood greenway, we're using a code word. So we're gonna remove the code word, we're gonna tell you what it actually is. So what we're saying is we're gonna calm that section of street so that people feel safe riding on it. That doesn't mean we remove anything, we actually add features in there so that people that are driving with the flow of where people would bicycle. So because there's not enough width to add everything, we don't wanna take anything away. but we also don't want people driving 25, 30 miles an hour in that section. So we actually had features in there to calm the traffic, to try to get people maybe driving 20 miles an hour or 15 miles an hour for that section. So that when you're riding and you're getting passed or bypassed, you're not getting bypassed at 30 miles an hour. So that's how we work with those conditions.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know, it's hard, it's one of those things when you're out there and you see it, you're like, oh yeah, but trying to, it's like playing Jeopardy when you try to explain it.
Yeah, another word for it is shared street, so we do traffic calming to make it feel so comfortable that you can share the street with cars.
What is traffic calming?
Traffic calming is getting people to drive the posted speed limit.
So if we're driving 30, we're driving the posted speed.
If it's posted 30 and you're driving 30, you're driving the posted speed limit. Typically in these projects in neighborhoods where we're doing these, the speed limit would get reposted at 20 miles an hour, example. And the hope is that we've designed it so people drive 20 miles an hour.
So you're gonna have 30 miles an hour all over town, and then you're gonna have 20 miles an hour in a certain section where everybody's used to 30, and now you got, basically, somebody thinks they're driving the speed limit, and then they get, picked up with the police for speed. It's called ribbons. So it's a speed trap.
So actually it's designed so that you feel like driving 20 is the appropriate speed. So if you think about downtown Fort Collins as an example, when you drive on 287 and there's a section south where there's not center parking, you drive about 30, 35, 40 miles an hour. When you enter Old Town and there's center parking and there's parking on both sides, the speeds drop to 25 because there's more elements and more awareness. So it's a gradual drop down and it's been designed so that you drive the posted limit. This is what we would try to do in these tight sections.
And it's similar, actually, the posted speed limit on Walnut, west of 11th Street drops to 25. And so I think once you get to those residential, once you get out of the wider stretch here, it probably would drop. But I guess speed is something that would be discussed in that study.
We're not done with that yet. There's more to go. And that's why we have the neighborhood process, because the residents that live along that will have a lot to say about that, want to be involved in that. So that's why we want to get the designs and that integration.
I would think where you have that reduced speed limit, you have some additional signage. Like Vic said, everybody's not used to it, that you know, just all of a sudden it's gonna be a little 25-mile-an-hour sign. Put some other kind of sign that
Yes.
make them aware of flashing or something.
And there's a PR campaign, the police department enforce it different than they enforce arterial streets, where it's posted at 40 and people are driving 52. You don't enforce these streets typically in the same way you enforce the arterials, right?
You don't go there. You don't go there.
You're probably right, we shouldn't speak out of turn, right? That's a good point.
I had a question on County Road 13. I know in other plans I've seen we're talking about the left turning lane here, but on the right side with the merge lane, eliminating that and having it go straight through to, I guess it'd be 17th. So where does that fall in time-wise with the two different projects, the left turning lane and then the merge?
So you're talking about the addition of another through lane between County Line Road and 17th Street, and that isn't part of the quick win. Dennis, I guess, was that part of one of the other CIP projects that's long term?
I think it was longer term,
Yeah.
Okay. Then the only other thing is, once we get the bike path on the other side, occasionally you see avid, like, road bikers going through that intersection with the Poudre River nearby. Most of the people who are just out leisurely biking aren't gonna go this path. But when we get the bike path over there, I'm just wondering, do we need to think about, it's not a great place for a pedestrian crossing. I know we don't wanna encourage it, but I don't know, I don't have the answer, so just something to think about. If we get people, like right now, if for the folks that live on County Road 13, once Kiger Reservoir, that trail's going, they can get there if they go into that tunnel under 392 and River Bluff.
Yeah.
But there's kind of a direct route now, you know what I mean? Once that trail is in there, so I don't know if we need to, it's not really, this intersection is not, and there's no plans to make it pedestrian friendly right now.
That's
But
right.
I guess it's something we're just gonna have to keep an eye on. But I think, most people will stay on the path. Just something to think
Well, I
about.
ask if Wade or Eric have any thoughts.
There will be some improvements
There will
made
be.
to the intersection.
And
Okay.
you'll see that as part of our recommendation for the trail connection to that intersection.
And I think if you talk to residents about that intersection, they would say the left turn lane's much more important than the merge lane if they had to pick one. That's what I hear about a lot.
You're talking about south of this, Eric? South of this intersection?
Yes, correct. From
Yeah,
the
and
river
south,
to the intersection.
over to the river.
Correct.
Well, and I think with, rain dance is much as that's booming, 13's gonna just continue to raise up. It'll be our 10 to the 5 if we don't get ahead of it.
And that was gonna be my question, is with long-term plans being to hopefully eventually have 392 expanded to 4 lanes, and the master plan having 13 being 4 lanes, would that intersection be done so that it's basically built for those long-term plans, or is this gonna be something where we put in, what is it, 300,000 now, and then 3 years from now, we're tearing out that $300,000 to redo it again?
Great question. So the design improvements that we do as part of this would consider the ultimate right-of-way / what the geometry would be. And so we would, so as an example where we need to move some signal poles, we need to move some islands, those, we would locate those in ways so they wouldn't have to be removed, right? Because this equipment is expensive to get out there, you want to put it out there once. The only caveat I probably would add to that would be if there was something that, we didn't have the right-of-way yet. In order to get the post in the right place, ultimately, if it wanted to be 10 more feet outside of the right-of-way, that may be harder to place it there. But we would try very hard to locate everything within the right-of-way where it ultimately would be. And well, you brought up a good point, I'll just make this last one. We had a 392 corridor study in this list of 36 projects that was generated by staff. It was from 257 all the way to I-25, I think was where, and it was basically to do a master plan corridor study, and that was one of the 36. Obviously, it didn't make it to the quick win list, but it was to do exactly what you suggested, which is all these intersections, how would we design it, what would it all look like?
I think one of the reasons that staff didn't move that one up the list as much is just because of the board's indication that you want projects that are more quickly implementable.
Yes.
And so that one is more of a longer term plan.
Right.
Yeah, we don't want to do a plan and bring you back 6 more plans.
Well, thank you. I have another question, which is a bigger umbrella question. Why are we only doing the transportation master plan every 10 years?
Well, we never had.
This is our first one.
So this is,
Well, that would explain the first question. The second question would be, I would think we'd want to do this in another 5 instead of the suggestion of every 10.
That wasn't meant to be a suggestion.
Oh, okay.
That was-
Well,
I think the consultant would suggest we update it every 6 months.
Well, with our strategic plan to have this as our, a goal, I would think with as fast as we're growing, where are we gonna be 5 years from now, or 4 years from now for implementation, 5 years from now, et cetera? I would think the community would be more in favor of us addressing this on a grand scale, or reevaluating every 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think with.
She said every 10, I just didn't know where that came from, it
Just to
scared
put
me.
weight behind the vision statement of, not knowing what the next one's going to be, that this will be the statement you'll point to until then.
It'll take some time to realize some of those visions though, right? So
Yeah.
communities that are updating their TMPs, WALNUT's a good example, they update every 5 years. They don't do a wholesale update, right? It's like a retirement plan, right? So your retirement account, you have a 401k, you're gonna touch it in 35 years from now, right? You're gonna touch it in 9 months. And, you have a 401k goal, right? And, I'll tell you this joke later. So then, but the idea is you have.
Please tell all of us.
You have this longer term vision of what you want to achieve. Sometimes it's going to take some things in this plan 10 years to do.
Yeah.
But every 5 years you should be going through, we have 5 years worth of, do we like this project evaluation criteria? Do we like how we're actually setting the tone? What's changed? Let's re-up the existing conditions. So you would probably spend half of what you're spending now in 5 years to do this plan because you have the starting point. But I think, and Carly, I probably agree with this, but you wouldn't want to do a wholesale change because there's no way that you're going to be able to achieve everything that's in this plan in 10 years.
The only reason I also bring it up is when we did our strategic planning for the board 15 months ago, 14 months ago, some of those goals were 2-year goals and some of those were 5-year, plans. And this should have been something that the town did a long time ago. so that we know where we were at today. I agree completely with what you're saying. I'm just bringing up the point of and Mr. Bennett would concur with this. I mean, the growth and the traffic, the congestion, et cetera, this is something that the people of Windsor want to see implemented as soon as possible. You know, there are a lot of things that would make a big difference without requiring, you know, moving mountains in essence to get done.
Well, I think what came out of this, I mean, this is one of the things that came out of the strategic plan, where we identified transportation issues and needs. So, I mean, obviously, I think that's how we got here to getting to the transportation master plan, and probably why we have some very quick and easy things that we can get out and done and in front of the public sooner rather than later, since we know it's a high priority and it's a high request.
And like Carlos just mentioned, one of the items that'll come out of the transportation master plan will be those project evaluation criteria. So this one's this year it's kind of an anomaly because we're only halfway through the TMP preparation, and so we do still need to draft the recommendations and get it adopted after the first of the year. But then next year, going into the budget process, we'll have the criteria that's in this plan so that the board will be able to look at the CIP and evaluate based on that criteria, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think to Paul's point, more frequent update in Colorado National Sports Park wasn't even on the horizon when we did our strategic plan. It wasn't that long ago. But if that in fact goes forward, it will have a huge impact on traffic. And it may change, it may change some priorities and flows of what we're anticipating today. So what other changes are there in a year or two that we can't even foresee?
Well, and a lot of these involve CDOT blessing in order to get, you know, completed, and we have all had our challenges working with them. So to your point, my point is I'm really looking forward to the CDOT because our biggest corridors are CDOT managed, maintained, funded, you know, thoroughfares, so.
The experience with CDOT will change now that you have this plan. Every community that has a transportation master plan and knows what they want can go to CDOT and advocate for it versus not having a plan. One of the values of this exercise that Frederick is leveraging and Dacono is leveraging is to say, here's our TMP, this is what we want. CDOT does not like, and Dennis is kind of shaking a little bit because it's still not a slam dunk, but CDOT doesn't like unpredictable projects. When they know a local agency, particularly elected officials, are on board with the project, they move a lot faster through and they find funding. So my hope, and I'm a half full kind of person, but my hope is that you would actually get some traction with CDOT on some of these projects because as a result of this TM.
Well, they find funding and we
except
find
there's
funding.
Very little money being forwarded towards transportation, so. So I would be cautious about that. However, when I went and talked to them about the 392, 257 feasibility network study, that's the first thing they asked is, what's your master transportation plan? So, they were looking at that even for that initial study. So maybe anybody have a final question so we can jump into the and give the next person some time? Make sure,
Just to wrap this portion of the agenda, I guess, were there any projects, those quick win projects that I want to make sure that we're continuing on with the ones that the board is most comfortable with, at least bringing back some more information for your discussion during CIP. Were there any that you didn't want us to bring back more information during CIP in a few weeks? Or were they all something that you'd like to hear more about?
I'd like to see that data that she's hiding.
I'm hiding it. We were actually whispering about it over in the corner because the nature of the exercise in which we collected staff input was a little different than something that's easy to quantify in the sense that it wasn't a voting exercise per se. We had that big floor map out. People were putting sticky notes down on what they want, and I think out of respect for listening to one another, people weren't, me too, me too, me too, even when they were maybe in their heads a little, nodding, shaking their heads, but it was hard to get some numbers. I think a staff type of voting exercise, maybe we would get some more numbers that could answer that data question of what is the staff support behind these different projects. But we went from the floor map exercise to conversations with Scott and some other folks and email correspondence to try to get a more of a thumb sense for,
Yeah.
do we have the right, staff support for these projects, and then the public support a little more quantified, but, which we can share that part, but that's what we're kind of talking about as we were thinking, like, do we have numbers that are valuable?
I think that that's, maybe Dave's more point, I mean, he's seen how the public rated these. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe going to at least see where the public had it for priority, because that's at least one piece of the puzzle. I mean, most of the staff that were in that exercise are in the room, and nobody's squeaking. I mean, we went through that, but I think at least to share with the board what the, public, where they put it, so we know that we're aligning dollars towards real issues and where the public wants to see them go. Is that fair?
Yeah, no one's gonna argue with whatever you put forward as priorities. There are 30 more priorities, right? To pick 6, you're not gonna miss.
Yeah.
They're all important.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what else was out there.
So I think in answer to your question, Scott, and moving forward, it seems there's a consensus that we want to continue to see what has been presented tonight.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Is there anything else that staff's needing for us to get to that final resolution by March? I mean, like input from us, or, I mean, are we on track to be able to meet the March?
Oh, yeah.
Money,
Yeah.
you just want money.
It's all about-
Carlos and Carly and team are.
I just wanted to ask if we were on, if there was an issue.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be coming back throughout that process,
Okay.
but at this point, this is good.
Okay, so with that, I want to introduce Will Jones, who's going to talk to us about the Greeley Evans Transit Pooter Express route, which is very timely, as Saturday at Coffee with the Mayor, that very question was just asked about. When is something coming, so.
Good.
He doesn't buy most of
Well, thank you, Mayor and Town Board, for having me. My name is Will Jones. I'm the Deputy Public Works Director for the City of Greeley, formerly the Transit Manager, so hence why I'm kind of up here. This was kind of my baby to some degree that we started the conversation on many, many years ago. And so talk about the Pooter Express, and I'll kind of high level. I think most of the town board members were here as we kind of went through many of the presentations leading up to this. So I'll try to hit and highlight some of the highlights. And if there's questions, by all means, feel free to throw something at me and ask. What I've got down at the bottom is basically showing the funding partners, potential funding partners as it relates to this, and I'll kind of highlight as we move forward through some of these slides where we're at. So, just topics, Transit 101, I won't get way into the weeds, but I think most everybody knows about transit and purpose thereof, and then we'll jump into Pooter Express. But basically, why transit? It really kind of breaks down into two things. You have the transit-dependent riders, so folks that have no other option, no car, single, vehicle, husband or wife taking that vehicle to work, and the spouse doesn't have a follow-up vehicle. And then you have riders of choice, and what this route kind of starts out with is a focus on that riders of choice, the folks that have a car but choose to, for whatever reason, ride transit, be it congestion, stress, being able to utilize from a time standpoint, being able to work while on the bus and so on. So from a history standpoint, there was a regional route from Greeley to Loveland back in 2009 to 2011. Hindsight's always 20/20. With that, we tried to service everyone and everything as it relates to that route, which means that travel times were nowhere close. And so for commuters, it was definitely, it was completely out of the ballpark as it relates. It would take double the time to drive as it relates to that. So in 2015, as part of the North Front Range MPO, there is a piece that goes into that regional transit or regional transportation plan, and that's the RTE. This route came out of that from feedback through that process. And then as part of our strategic plan, 5 to 10 year strategic plan, we heard that loud and clear from City of Greeley citizens as it relates to a need or a want for that regional transportation to and from Fort Collins through Windsor. And then also through our comprehensive plan that was done in 2017. So as such, Greeley staff, along with the Blow partners, really started looking at pulling the data together, right? And I'll get into that a little bit. But lots of partners from CSU to UNC to the town as far as pushing out surveys, and I'll get into some of that data here in a little bit. So UNC and CSU were gracious enough to basically give us shapefiles of addresses for faculties and students. Where do they live? And so that kind of starts telling a story of where people are traveling to and from. So we've got, so this demonstrates UNC faculty and students that live in this case Loveland, Windsor, and Fort Collins, making that commute on a daily basis. So definitely, and as you're looking at transit routes, you're trying to get activity centers to activity centers, right? And really from our perspective, trying to get those folks that have to make that trip every day. Looking back at the 34 Express, trying to connect, you know, we're not only taking longer, but we weren't really connecting activity centers as it relates to that. So take that same approach to CSU, and you've got that same information for Greeley, Windsor, going to Fort Collins. Obviously Loveland's on there, but you already have the flex from transport making that route possible. So all in all, when you throw Front Range and Ames in the mix, just shy of 3,000 people making that commute on a daily basis, right? So really, if we can, as we design these routes, we start looking at doorstep to doorstep, we really have an opportunity to connect a one-seat ride for somebody trying to get from home to work or school and back. So a little bit more demand analysis. So you take, and this is, the data is a little old, this is part of this older study, but if you expand that beyond that, as you tie your unemployment data with, and tie out the where they work, the zip code, along with the residents through unemployment insurance, you can see there's just over 14,000 people making that commute. And then the options, obviously costly, and actually one of these doesn't exist anymore, Smart Rides is out of business. Part of the next step that we took was actually through social media, and a very online focused survey. Windsor pushed it out through their social media. We had some direct interactions with CSU, UNC. They actually pushed it out via their email to their email listing. And good response as it relates to that. 657 people said they take it 3 to 5 days a week. Going to work, 225, going to school, and you tie in some of the overall convenience, time it takes, and then potential ridership as it relates to that. Taking in our growth, you guys talked about it a little bit earlier as it relates to Windsor, and it's really northern Colorado in general. It's not slowing down anytime soon. So we took all that information and basically went to the next level and started working on the business plan. And so I'll kind of focus a little bit on the Windsor side of stuff as it relates to this slide. Really looked at a couple different routing alternatives as it relates to going through Windsor. The alternative one had us coming up 257, taking a left on Eastman Kodak, and then going straight up 257 and going all the way to 14 into CSU. Alternative 2 was basically going up 257 and 392 and across. We run into some significant number of railroad tracks in there, and folks that have ridden the bus, every time you have to go across tracks, you get open door. And then alternative 3 was the one that was selected. It provided the best proximity to potential riders, and it's tied into I-25 and the Harmony Transportation Center there as well. So kind of see the overall route as it relates between Greeley and Fort Collins through Windsor. And we did have talks as it relates to another stop in Windsor specific to Eastman Park and 257, forget the company name. Tomar, thank you, appreciate that.
So are you turning on Walnut to First?
So it'd be coming up 257, taking a left on Eastman Kodak, and then taking a right on 7th.
Oh, okay.
And then a left on 392.
Can you go back to the slide with the bubbles?
Oops.
That, and
Yep.
show me where the route is compared to the concentration of
Yeah,
green and
so, let me get my
that-
bearings here real quick. So, this is I-25 right here.
blue? Sure, no, I get the big ones.
Sorry, I'm not following.
Where is the route go compared to where all those blue and green bubbles
So
are?
they're going, it's going straight across here. So it's coming up and then straight across.
That's Eastman Kodak?
So Eastman Kodak would be down here. Sorry.
That's 392.
Yeah, correct. That's, this line right here is 392.
And then where would be the closest stop?
So there would be one right at, where we have, right, King Soopers there, was that 15th, I think it is?
Okay.
Yep.
Surprised me.
So the overall route, which we kind of talked about, the timing wise, I mean, I think at the last meeting, asked us to go back and verify some of the timing. We came back and drove it in a bus. Some of the times did flex a little bit, but the overall timing stands as it is. And so there'll be some variations that in this original plan, but the overall time, again, will stay, so. So kind of resources needed, so basically, we've got buses that'll be delivered next month. So City of Greeley, as part of their budgeting process, have purchased buses, and they'll be here. They'll be Wi-Fi capable, USB plug-in, a little bit cushier seats for that longer ride as it relates to that. From a funding standpoint, the City of Greeley, and then all the funding partners, the City of Fort Collins and CSU have partnered together to fund $120,000. That includes, as you'll see in the notes there, $5,000 towards bus capital and $5,000 to allow CSU and faculty students to ride for free. You'll see City of Greeley's dollar amount, $110,000, that's less than Fort Collins and Windsor because of the bus capital side of stuff. We'll incorporate that into our bus capital replacement as we do every year. And then CDOT Faster Grant, so we have applied for $40,000, received that for this year to kind of get started. Got to get drivers hired, obviously, and get going. And then we've applied for it and are on track to receive another $200,000 in faster operating grant. So a total of $545 as it relates to that.
What was the fare for people who are not CSU?
So $1.50 is what it would be, or people can buy a pass. We're actually working with Fort Collins and Loveland to have a regional pass, which means you would be able to ride in Greeley on this route in Fort Collins or in Loveland as well. So you're not having to get out a different type of fare media for each type of system that you may have.
I see the focus on CSU and saying, okay, if you're faculty, you can ride for free, but what about the other local governments participating? I mean, you know, I'm certain we have employees in Fort Collins, Greeley, and vice versa.
And that's definitely something that we actually have a plan in place that, and I have back of mind, I've got a smart sticker that'll work, and we have that type of program that we can set up for not only governmental agencies, but also employers, maybe Tomar, some of those other folks, so we have those that we.
But then I would assume then our contribution is gonna rise by 5,000.
Well,
Because
no, well, I'm just thinking, I mean, if we're contributing $115,000, I mean, could our employees ride as a part of that contribution?
So that's something we haven't talked about. Typically, I mean, even our own employees there's a reduced amount to ride, right? But that's something that, I mean, I think the biggest thing to get this off the ground and get usage there, so that helps complement that, but that's something we could talk about. It definitely won't cost $5,000. There's obviously a bigger demand.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because CSU's is higher, but then you've got the 5,000 in the ridership, so that's what I guessed was why this is higher.
You've got a bigger pool there as it relates to that, potential riders, a lot more folks. There's it's $600 a semester or a year to have a parking pass there, so there's definitely gonna be a little bit higher usage as it relates to that. And again, this is a starting off point, you know, it depending on fare revenue, what that fare revenue is, it comes out of that operating cost. So if our operating cost for this route is $500,000 a year, and we end up having, you know, $50,000 for the fare box recovery, that comes off of your guys' bill as it relates to operating costs and contribution, so.
And what do you anticipate those shelters would cost to construct?
So it really varies. I think the number, I forget, Darren, do you remember that number offhand that was in there on the shelters? But I think
it varies in the size and the kind, somewhere between 12 to 15,000.
Yeah, and you don't have to start off with that. I mean, that's something that I think definitely bus pads as it relates to ADA purposes, being able to get folks in wheelchairs on the bus and so on and so forth for folks with disabilities. You know, I think definitely a bench, which is a lower entry rate, if you will, as it relates to that.
Yes, so the packet materials include just some emails with some cost estimates that are ideas that will be used during the CIP discussion, because obviously there will be a CIP impact as well, that we'll be talking about the purchase of any benches, signage, trash receptacles, and then the concrete pad and ADA requirements. But yeah, we may want to hold off on some of the more elaborate infrastructure to make sure that the location doesn't shift at all or something like that.
Right.
And it is a little bit of chicken and the egg. There's definitely not decent enough balance, but the you know, the shelters and whatnot do have some benefit as it relates to attracting ridership. Folks recognizing, I mean, you go from having a bench and a bus stop sign to a shelter, there is some benefit as it relates to that. But it's a balance, definitely.
And then Greeley and Fort Collins have pretty sophisticated busing systems, get the people around within town. Windsor, of course, doesn't have any of that. So if we have a disabled or, you know, elderly folks on the east side of Windsor here, to get to those stops, we have to figure out something.
That is something, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's different ways you can backfill that with paratransit or door-to-door type of service, and that's something we could potentially talk about down the road as it relates to, we do that for Evans and Garden City, so we actually provide fixed route and Garden City, paratransit to those residents as well as part of an intergovernmental agreement with them. So you could have an elderly or disabled person that is on the east side that they would call into our number, schedule a trip. I mean, there's some further conversations that would have to happen, but that's definitely a possibility because we do that for other municipalities, so.
So this is scheduled to start in January and be, I mean, will there be a trial test period, or January will be the date and it all starts moving forward?
Starts moving forward on that. Typically on transit routes, you know, our goal is obviously right out the gate, be strong. We've done a lot of planning up to it. But from a reality standpoint, routes typically take 2 to 3 years to really fully develop. Not that we won't make some tweaks, adjustments as it relates to time, feedback, that type of stuff, but it takes time for routes to fully develop as it relates to that.
So we have a lot of different entities kind of involved in this project. Who's going to be the lead on the communications effort? Because prior to this, you know, ramping up and then going out the door, I think it's going to be important that there's one voice that we're all talking about the same way. So that will come from you in your office.
Correct. Okay. We're already moving and have a bit or a plan together, and part of that's marketing and reaching out to your own individual PIO or CEO, whatever your naming convention is for your marketing folks.
Okay.
But we'll have that, and same with CSU, we're gonna have that stuff that can be going out to those folks. Not that we don't make tweaks or work through that, but we wanna be able to provide consistent information as it relates to that.
Okay. Any other questions for Will?
Because the one question that came up after the copy of the mayor, what kind of buses are they? Are they like diesel or?
CNG, compressed natural gas.
Okay, natural gas.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct. Long term, my perspective is we'll probably be moving into electric, and I'd love to be able to, we're already starting, goal in a couple of years to start doing some analysis as it relates to that, but really from an industry standpoint, electric buses are kind of the direction I think you'll see the industry go.
So are you able to get, or are you getting any of the VW settlement money? Because all that money's going to CNG.
Well, electric.
Right,
Yeah.
it's going to electric, but
Yeah.
there's some conversation, I guess, on the last call, if they could also be on to placed in
We're not quite there from an infrastructure standpoint.
Okay.
There's some things we need to do for our own facility. There's some, as it relates to route operations and whatnot, your mileage is a little bit limited compared to what you have with a CNG bus or a diesel bus. So it's not as plug and play, no pun intended. It's definitely coming, but there's some work that we need to do on the front.
So I think there was some question in that last conversation for folks to maybe push that, so that that money could start going to CNG and not wait for all the, the electrical stuff. So maybe, so I guess that answers my question of what I need to be pushing for, because we definitely want to see this. We can't wait for electric stuff.
And we can replace it as,
Right.
as they come down.
My question is, going back, how do we know that people are gonna use this in Windsor?
It goes back-
$115,000, and do we have any kind of, survey results from all those dots in Windsor that say that these people are gonna get on, get off?
It goes back to, and I went back and I forget the exact information, or don't have it, but I can get that as it relates to that 657 and that 225, how many of them were from Windsor or not.
I just wanna know that people are gonna use it. They might be here, they may be going to Greeley and Fort Collins, but if
And
everybody still wants to be independent, doesn't wanna take this form of transportation that we're trying to advocate, obviously lessen the volume on our roads and, et
Well,
cetera,
but
et
it's
cetera.
definitely a very inexpensive way for, I think, Windsor to get its feet into some level of transit. It's a much smaller investment because Greeley's the one who took the lead. I mean, their investment in the buses is like almost $1 million, isn't it?
About $600,000 a bus. I mean, and then part of that is part of the $5,000 will help when we go to replace those, right? But they're getting used between now and then, so yeah,
And I think this is considered kind of a test phase in that we will be looking at this because that's what happened on 34. They piloted that program, they put it out there, and they didn't have the ridership they needed, and so they stopped the program. That's why it was only,
And
2 years?
We'll have data, so we'll know how many people we're picking up on your stop. Eventually, as we get AP or automatic passenger counters in place, we'll know how many people are getting off at that stop. So some of those 657, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you all 657 of those folks are gonna take the bus. I mean, it's.
But Greeley's taken the bigger risk by buying the buses, but they also can absorb those buses back into their regular system if for some reason this fails or doesn't work, right? I think that's the thought.
Yep.
Well, and I think my question is kind of along with Dr. Jones. I just think it's gonna be key for any stop we have. We've gotta have adequate parking there because we don't have any kind of regional busing or anything to get people to that stop. It's not gonna be usable. People have to walk 8 blocks to do it. It's just, I don't anticipate that many doing it.
That's why we, to some degree, looked at, and it ties into the earlier conversation for 7th Street, right? So there's parking along there currently, so that's kind of, we picked some of those. There's by the King Super Safeway, and we've had some conversations about talking with them. So trying to identify those stops that, without having to go build a park and ride location, or some of those that'll low entry from a dollar amount, so.
So we'd enter into an IGA, is that right?
Correct.
And we'd have there be an opt-out if,
Correct. Yep.
say it's working great in Fort Collins and Greeley, but Windsor, nobody's
And so
using it.
what would happen at that point is then we'd obviously, there'd be, looking at the route, how's the best way at that point to get people from Greeley to Fort Collins, not going through Windsor, and removing those stops. And don't mean that in a negative way, but yeah, there's.
Severance will take them then.
They'll be on the bus bypass.
Well, one thing I was thinking about was people who use like Mustang, like I've used Mustang. And, and I went to Fort Collins and I realized, well, geez, now I can go to Highway 34, and I could see like if someone's doing Mustang, they might not use this, because, well, I gotta get in my car and drive to King Supers, I'll just drive over to 34.
Yeah.
So we might not catch those people who are still using transit. Yeah.
Well, and some of the thought process on using that Harmony Transportation Center, because through our analysis and whatnot, why are we stopping there? Well, I'm also trying to get people coming back this other direction, and that's a good southern location, southeastern location out of Fort Collins, so.
Just a comment and a question, the same trip, Boulder to Denver, is $5.50 now, so just as a term of representation, the same distance, same type of vehicle is $5.50. But you have bus, but can you put a bike on the bus, either on a rack or below?
Yes.
Yeah.
So all of our buses will have, they hold up to 3 on the front.
Awesome, great.
What about a rickshaw? Could you fit?
Time will tell.
He's real skinny.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
That's great.
Well, thank you, Will, for coming and presenting and giving us this update. We appreciate it. Okay.
Start at the Windsor and get
Sorry.
there.
Bumping into you.
So the idea is you're gonna
We're out of time.
have your 401k.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.